So today, we are going to be exploring community leadership, collaboration, and impact through the work of Neighborhood Connections and Neighbor Up. We are joined by Tom O'Brien, who is the director of Neighborhood Connections, which is a nationally recognized community building program. Neighborhood Connections funds resident-led grassroots projects in Cleveland and East Cleveland, provides training and technical assistance, and connects citizens to each other, to organizing campaigns, and to policy discussions. Prior to joining Neighborhood Connections, Tom was a community organizer in Cleveland's Slavic Village neighborhood. And prior to that, he served on the staff of the Jesuit Volunteer Course Northwest as an area director, recruiting, training, and assisting full-time volunteers in Oregon and Washington. He is also a graduate of Leadership Cleveland class of 2011 and our LC2 Fellows Program 2012. We are also joined by Gwendolyn Garth, who is a Neighbor Up community leader and artist leading Kings and Queens of Art, whose mission is to build a network of artists and resources that support a vibrant arts environment in a neighborhood context, and to be a catalyst for transforming community through the celebration of the arts and African American history and culture. They create and provide safe communal space for all kinds of artists, beginners to professionals, no matter what ethnicity or artistic discipline, and to come together and express their creative sides. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Tom and Gwendolyn.
Thanks, Rachel, and thanks for having us here today. Really appreciate it, you and the Leadership Center. So we're going to start off, this first part is just really talk about kind of the strategy that undergirds our work. And then Gwen's going to give some real life examples of how it's worked in her life and in her community. And then we're going to go with the questions, maybe talk more about how this this approach, we're adapting it to today's world. So what we want to talk a little bit about is community network organizing. And our vision is to get thousands of people in the game, thousands of people from the community involved in community life, in democracy, really. And so what we're going to do is discuss the philosophy and strategy and why it's needed more than ever, and then hear Gwen talk a little bit about her experience. So Neighborhood Connections, just a little background, we're founded by the Cleveland Foundation in 2003 as a small grants program. In 2013, our main focus became building and bridging inclusive, equitable, and just communities using an approach called community network building as our primary strategy. We still give out a lot of grants every year. We can talk more about that later, small grants to neighborhood groups throughout the city of Cleveland and East Cleveland as well. A couple of quotes that really speak to our approach. This one from Martin Luther King Jr. "Power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demand of justice, and justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love." So really we're working towards building power and also creating a really caring community with our work. The second real key quote that I think is important to our work is this from Paulo Freire. They talk about the people, but they do not trust them. And trusting the people is the indispensable precondition for revolutionary change. A real humanist can be identified more by his trust in or her trust in the people, which engages them in their struggle, than by 1,000 actions in their favor without that trust. And so trust is really at the heart of what we do, and starting with residents, starting with the people most affected is where we start. So why community network building, and what is it? Things have changed a lot in the 21st century. Our lives are busy. We're relying more and more, especially now during this pandemic, on information technology. The gaps have widened between the haves and the have-nots, whites and people of color. There's been huge job loss, shift in the global economy. The role of government and systems changes based on a lot of different things, as we all know. There's a lot of mobility. There's increased fear and increased distrust of each other. So really the underlying issue of our work is that we've been divided by racism, by class displacement, by public systems by the wealth asset gap and the culture of the rugged individual, right? We're afraid of each other and we don't know how to connect to optimize our quality of life. So our solution to that, or part of the solution, is using this approach called community network organizing. And really what we're trying to do, it's highlighted in the bold letters, is build a functional civic infrastructure that optimizes the aggregate contribution of all residents and stakeholders toward making that place work. Getting thousands of people in the game, bringing their best selves, right? Bringing their gifts, their talents, their skills, their wisdom, their entrepreneurship, their creative solutions. So when we look at kind of traditional social service versus what we do, traditional social services tends to look at needs, right? What is not there, and develop those services to meet those needs. And people are seen as consumers, right? It's clients. Programs are the answers. And those are needed. We're not saying those aren't needed. What we say is we look at the assets. What is there? What are the gifts, talents, wisdom, experience, gifts of the head, hands, and heart? We try and bring people together, right? To build trust, to create connections, and then create solutions to some of those problems. So what we say are people are the answer, right? People. Citizens, meaning people who are active in a democracy. That doesn't mean documented or undocumented. We're not talking about that. We're talking about people in the community. So our objective is to get thousands in the game and connect them to good information, for mutual support, and to act collectively on issues. Neighbor Up is the network, the space that does that. And membership is not a club for needy people, right? People have needs, but we're creating an environment filled with love and power, right? Where people can bring their best selves to create the world they want right where they live. And so here's a typical community environment. This isn't everywhere, but it's in a lot of places, especially today. And you can look at it on a street, but you could also look at it in a neighborhood. You could look at it across the country, right? There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of isolation. There's a lot of division. And so what we do is we create with community new spaces and practices that lead to new relationships, new awareness, and tangible benefits. There's real value for people in participating. They can give their gifts, they can get something out of it. And out of that comes new networks of trust that lead to shared understanding, right? Greater innovation and stewardship of the connected environment. So this inner circle, the blue circle, we start with building neighborhood networks. And those networks really are about building and sharing power, right? Where everybody has voice and they're bringing their best. That sparks social innovation. That social innovation leads to institutional and system reform. That's kind of how it plays out. And we have many examples of that here. We're going to hear one today from Gwendolyn Garth. Okay, just a quick thing about community building, and this is a lot on this side, but I'll just do it very quickly. At the cellular level, place-based community starts with a single relationship of trust and mutual benefit of one resident or stakeholder with another. And it's the aggregate of those relationships, all of those relationships that happen, all of those small relationships, some are really strong, some are loose or less, but it's a community that creates kind of the infrastructure to make change. And then what happens with those relationships, the collective decision-making, the problem solving, the entrepreneurship, the mutual support, the information sharing, that leads to what we consider to be community, right? So Neighbor Up, Neighborhood Connections, we're creating the infrastructure for community to connect with each other because we feel like a lot of that has been lost because of divisions, as I mentioned before. So we create spaces, which are spaces and events that anchor network engagement and practices, activities, habits, and protocols that shape network engagement. And here are some of the examples you can see here. Some of the spaces, you may have been to a network night, a neighbor night. We have spaces where we talk about and get educated on racial equity and inclusion. Just a whole host of things there, right? And then the practices, these are simple things we do to create more equitable spaces that are full of life, right? Check-ins, mapping, make art, talk race. You'll hear a little bit about that. Door knocking, one-on-ones, hello circles, right? These small little practices that create the environment for people to really bring their best selves and to share. So this is kind of how we envision the network. It's a big tent with many doorways, and these around the periphery of the circle are the doorways where people come in. So imagine like thousands of people outside of this circle, and we're inviting them into this tent, really around what they care about. So someone may come forward who's really concerned about digital equity, and they come into this big tent, and then they meet other people. Some may be from their neighborhood in Buckeye, some may be around storytelling, some may be around racial equity and inclusion, and they meet other people and they form groups or relationships that spark change. So that's kind of a really quick overview of what we do. But to remember, it's really about creating that aspirational space where people can come together, and there is, you know, dealing with the hard issues, right? But also caring about each other and developing power to make change. So I'm going to turn it over to Gwen now to talk about her experience with Neighbor Up.
Hi, everyone. I feel honored for being here, and thank you for the invitation. Wow, Tom, as I see, as I listen to you talk about neighborhood connections, I saw myself, and I believe that I am the pictorial definition of all of that. So when I first was introduced to neighborhood connections, let me go back. I am I'm an artist and the founding owner of Kings and Queens of Art. And way before that, I have another hat that I wear as an ex-felon and a returning citizen. I tell that story because I am trying to, one of my goals in my organization is to reinvent communities and changing the perceptions about the people in those communities. And one of the communities that is really overlooked are our returning citizens. So I don't mind using myself as an example of the possibilities when the doors are open for people to change. So the picture that you're looking at is on my street. On the corner of my street is behind a mini mall. I stay in the central area on Outway off of 55th. So I was about 11 years into my recovery, and I was feeling this void. Going to work, going to school, going to church wasn't enough. And I had learned in my recovery process to be careful of that void or that space, that emptiness. And so I was asking God, what could I do to help to step out into my neighborhood? And every time I walked to the bus stop, I would see that, and I kept hearing his voice say, paint that wall. So I was looking at that wall, and I said, oh, that wall is mighty big. I can't do that wall. So I had a conversation with God. I said, okay, if this is you talking, show me how to paint that wall. And 3 days later, my girlfriend came and gave me a card introducing me to Neighborhood Connections. And so it's been on ever since then. And that was in 2012. And so if you can see the wall now, it's behind some businesses. Like I said, a mini mall. I started, I applied I went to the workshop that they were giving, that Neighborhood Connection was giving. I got information from a lot of the people that were already there on how to paint that wall. And so I went about doing that. So these are some of the young people that I got to help me with the designing of that wall. Next slide. These are the beginning. We had I started off with cleanup day, and we had people coming, senior citizens. I stay in between two housing projects, and I had seniors from the high rise, King Kennedy North, and my daughter, and a bunch of people, a bunch of residents in the neighborhood. They came out and helped clean up that field. Next slide, Tom. And these are through Janthrope, a very good friend of mine that I met, and she's a very valuable asset, and she really knows how to get how to get supplies and equipment and stuff. And she's really a true resource and how to get things done. So these young ladies, these are not young ladies, but people from Magnificat High School in Rocky River. They heard about it. They were looking for a project to do, and they came out and helped us paint. We also had help from City Year. We had help from the community-based correctional facility. Some of my art students from the art class, they came out and helped me to put the initial drawing on the wall. Next slide, Tom. And so this is us working on the wall. Next slide. Okay, this is another practice. So a couple of years, so I think right after that, I got involved with Neighborhood Connections, or around the same time I was doing a fellowship with Neighborhood Connections. At the end of my 2-year fellowship, I felt like Neighborhood Connections was my tribe. It was the spot that I was looking for. I no longer had that void. My life was filled. My spirit was no longer wandering. I had found a home for it. Later on, during the rash of police killings across the country, I think that started like 2014. And so in Neighborhood Connections, we were all sitting around figuring out what could we do as individuals. We were feeling hopeless and helpless, and we were trying to figure out what we could do. So Danielle and I came up with Make Art Talk Race. She came up with the technical part of it, and I added the art part to it. And so we developed Make Art Talk Race. And so it's been on since then, where we do few weeks, so we do about 10 weeks of talking, conversations with a diverse group of, we assembled a diverse group of people from all walks of life. And we get together and have conversations centered around the 4 levels of racism. And at the end, we have an end project. And at our first one, we created a float that we participated in Parade the Circle event that year. And the second iteration of Make Art Talk Race was painting the bridge on 22nd Street that divides the Cleveland State University from the housing projects to the south. And so as you can see, we were joined by Councilwoman Cleveland, and we had people, I always invite people in when people are passing by blowing their horn. I said, come on and join us. So we had people who got out their cars and they came and they joined us. If you look at that mural, yes, it's not as beautiful or as other murals and stuff, but what I really like about this mural is because people did this mural. The people in the community, and not I myself. I really found out what it meant to be a lead artist. It means that I can lead the people to the artwork, that I don't have to necessarily do the work. That was a growing moment for me also in doing the Bridge That Bridges project. Next slide, Tom. This is also me exhibiting another one of my challenges as a spoken word artist. We're doing a 10-year anniversary for Neighborhood Connections, and our budget kind of had run out of money for some kind of entertainment. And so I volunteered, not knowing that I was going to end up opening up the whole event. I told Tom I can do spoken word, And the next thing I know, when I looked at the agenda, I was leading the way, and I was like, "Oh my God, okay." But I was nervous as heck the whole time. Everybody said I was good, but they don't know I was sweating bullets. The whole thing.
You were great. You were great. We still use what you wrote, Mr. Clock. What time is it, Mr. Clock?
Yeah, I created a poem for them called "What Time Is It, Mr. Clock?" Just for Neighborhood Connections. I also created this dress that I'm wearing. I had procrastinated. I wanted to do a piece of artwork, and I had procrastinated about going to Joann's Fabric, so it got down to the 9th hour and I needed some material, and there was a tablecloth. So I took a tablecloth and turned it into a caftan, painted it, and that's one of my signature pieces on the front. And voila, I had a costume. So yeah. I'll send y'all the poem. I'll send the poem to you, Rachel, because right now my head it's lost in my head. But the poem is about it states what Neighborhood Connections does, and it tells that the first line goes, "What time is it, Mr. Clock?" And it's half past action. It's half past time for action. And that's just what it is now. It's half past time for action. Yeah. Next slide. And also what happens is, so I didn't know that my name had gotten out there. So somebody called me from Washington, D.C., a group of Native American Indians. They were coming across from Washington. They were coming across the United States from Washington to Dakota, where they were having the stand down, they reached out to me, and so in a day I had to find a wall for them to paint. And so this is my landlord's building. This is the building I live in, and they put that up in a day. And I didn't know my house was that big. I housed 11 people going back and forth, eating and whatever, all in a day. But it was fun, and this is something that we support, not only what we do here in Cleveland, but we support others as they want to get out their message, as some of the things that Tom had talked about. So, I created this logo for Neighbor Up. It symbolizes what I feel about Neighbor Up, building the house of the city.
All right, thank you.
So is that my time or no? Okay. Did you have any more pictures, or you just that was it?
That's all we have. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I've been on to do many other things. I've stepped out to do many other things that I didn't know. And what I really want to get the message across is, Tom talks about creating a space. The one thing that I loved about Neighborhood Connection, when I needed a space and not really knowing what kind of space I needed, a door was open. And there was no question about where I had been, who I was been. Never, those things were never asked. All they did was support me in my endeavors and whatever I wanted to do. Help me think it through. Even when I've been wrong in some things, and they've helped me see myself in a very also gentle way. It's just a space. I really like it because they have not went away. We're always, one of Tom's motto is fail fast and often. I really love that. I apply to things in my life, even in my artwork. I just go do it. Don't sit spending hours and days thinking about how we're gonna do this or if this is gonna work. And I think that a lot of times we hesitate on, is it gonna work? And I don't wanna try this. What people gonna think about? We just go ahead. If it works, it works. If it don't, it don't. And we'll try something else. We always have conversations, which I love, is what went well and what could we have done better. I really love those. I apply that to my own life and my own work. I'm always asking myself, how can I do this better? How can I do this different? Those kind of things. And I truly feel like they are my family. My own natural family is have transitioned, and I really have just my cousins and my children and nephews. But they have become my family, my go-to. They're real, authentic people that allow me to be. And I feel honored to grow in that space. And I think if we're talking about changing communities, we have to change the people in those communities. And that's the only way that we're going to change the communities. If we we must hold the space for a person to grow, to see themselves, you know. And I think that's so important, because a lot of times I know I did, that's how I got involved with the drugs and the alcohol, was following my peers and trying to belong. We all want to belong. And a lot of times we're not sure or clear about which road to choose, you know. So having the good space to grow in, I think, is very important and very vital to the growth of our neighborhoods, and having that open door, the doors that, and we're there all the time. We're there all the time. You know, people can call somebody. I just did a rapid response grant, and I did a outdoor movie night, trying to figure out, like I said, I live between two projects, and I'm trying to give my people some hope and spirit and some spiritual uplifting. So I showed an outdoor movie. I wanted to do an outdoor movie. So just as we had practiced the night before, but the next day we didn't have the volume for our speaker. So I made a call to one of the people in the network, and he made a call. And the next thing I know, 20 minutes later, somebody was pulling up with some speaker and the technology and showed me how to get it all together. And we had our movie night. I was really, really proud to be a member of that. And I was like, yeah, this is how it works. This is how it works, you know. And I'm glad to be here. And they can't get rid of me, Tom.
Never, never.
Thank you.
So thanks, Gwen. So Rachel, I'll turn it back to you and if there's questions, but Gwen, thank you for sharing all that you do. And there's more there. So you can talk to Gwen to get far more in her work on institutional and systems change as well. So.
Tom and Gwendolyn, thank you both so much. This is great insights into the work that you both are doing in the community. So we have had a few questions come in, and let's start with, you've mentioned so much about creating a safe space and the trust building. And in a time when there is so much division in our world, it can really be scary to come into a new space and open up to people that you may not know that well. How do you work to create those environments at Neighbor Up nights that allow for people to feel comfortable to begin opening up, and that process of building trust?
Yeah, it's really about the environment, right? Creating an environment where people feel welcome, feel heard, feel seen. So it's really small practices that that we put into place to make that happen, or little devices, little contrivances to build those connections. So a couple of examples. One is the space. The space is colorful, right? We make sure there's color in there. We make sure there's food, and we make sure there's some music, right? And so it's a joyful place. When people walk in, it's like, oh, this is like a party, right? Like, this is a place I want to be, right? So even if it's in a drab room, we're trying to create the space so that it's a place that's inviting and people want to be there. And we have people greeting people when they come in. Then the little practices we use small things that really start helping people to get to prime the room for what we say positivity or aspiration. So when we start off, we do a check-in where people get to, say who they are, where they're from, and we ask a question a little bit so they can reveal a little bit about themselves. So one we do is what's called new and good. So people will say something that's new and good in their life, which could be, they got a new job, right? Or they have, gone back to school, or they have a new grandchild or a new child, right? Or, they got an A on their paper, whatever it is, right? For school. That's really kind of some of the practices. The other thing we use a lot is a thing called the marketplace, where people can make an offer and say, hey, I need this, right? I need a ride home. The first one I ever went to, I said, I didn't have a car. I said, I need a ride home tonight. And someone gave me a ride home, right? So just things like that were, or the other could be making an offer and saying, hey, I have these extra, we have a job available at Neighborhood Connections. Anybody interested, here's how to apply, or, you know, it could be any of that. So it's really asking those, you know, and then we have what we call our table talks, or what we call business of the network. And that's where people kind of get together around a question, what they want to work on together. So some of those questions have come up that have led to bigger change, like equity and funding in the arts, or infant mortality and how to address that with that's so devastating in African American communities with Black mothers, right? That is a systemic issue around racism. Or how do we get more white people to understand white supremacy and make changes around that, right? Conversations like that, or hiring local, right? How do we get some of the big institutions in University Circle to hire local residents rather than people from other places, right? People right in their backyard. So those are the kinds of things that really create the space where people have an opportunity to talk, to connect, to have some fun, but they don't have to turn their lives over to this, right? They can choose what they want to do and what they want to participate in. So if someone doesn't want to check in, they don't have to, right? It's not, we're not marching around the circle making sure people check in. Gwen, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that.
I do, and what makes it different from that or a church or an organization is that there are no parameters. And like Tom said, that you can stay if you want to or leave when you want to. The door works both ways. You don't have to be anything or the hat you wear. I mean, you don't have to be somebody important to belong or to come, to be invited. And the room really works, and the environment thing really works for letting you down your guards. When I feel comfortable, then I can, you know, I've been to people's houses where I don't feel comfortable and they say, can I take your coat? And I said, no, that's all right. And you know what I'm saying? Then you go to people's houses that are, you immediately take your shoes off, you know, because you feel that comfortable, you know. So Neighborhood Connections is one of those places where you take your shoes off and you get comfortable. Yeah.
So with that in mind, and the idea of creating spaces and coming together, how have you adjusted with Neighborhood Connections and Neighbor Up over the past few months when we physically aren't coming together?
Yeah, we've done, so we have a couple of things we do every week where that brings people together. One is what we call a community of practice. It's a peer mutual support circle where people share what they're doing to build community. It's held every Wednesday from either at 1 o'clock or at 6 o'clock at night. And we get 25 or 30 folks who come together to talk about how they're building community and what are some of the challenges with that. We've done the same. We have neighbor nights still. We do it virtually. So we've done them, like last week, West Park had one, the West Park neighborhood, and they use Zoom to do that. We also do have some folks who go door to door. So we've had some people deliver stuff, right? So we are still providing grants. We have these COVID-19 rapid response grants that are up to $5,000 that have gone out to Geauga, Lake, and Cuyahoga counties, given out over almost $600,000 in those grants. And those are for grassroots groups and small nonprofits, small faith-based organizations to really address COVID-19 with masks, supplies, food, and especially relationships, right? So all of that. So we've done some, you know, with the trainings we do, we've done some physically distant trainings where we get together and so we stay 6 feet away with masks, and have done that in open air spaces, not inside. So there's kind of a mix of that. We've had other people call people, right? We created this thing, Listening and Connecting. People got lists of people that they would check in on every week. Some people who may be isolated or left out, right? So we've done some of that. It's hard though. It is hard, right? But because it doesn't have the energy of the in-person things. Mm-hmm. But, you know, so instead of mailing like our checks to grant recipients, we have a couple of people who go and deliver them face to face, right? And say, hey, here we are. Thanks. Good job. What do you need? Right? And do that too. So But again, with physical distance and with, masks, taking precautions.
We've done a couple of things also, Tom, about the caravans. We've
That's
broken
right.
down, trying to we've formed caravans. A couple of them went to Lorraine and the west side, trying to passing out the message about the census and voting. And so we that's another new way that we're trying to get out the word, the message. We pass out packages, little packages of information with masks and etc. Even on the west side, we pass out bread. That's another something new that we've been trying.
Yeah, that's a group of cars that form, or trucks, and they drive through the neighborhood, right, with a speaker and saying, we're here, right? Come on out. We got, yeah. And so Caravana comes from Puerto Rico and used mainly for political purposes, but we're using it for connectivity purposes and information sharing.
What advice would you give to other organizations or groups who are looking to build the type of hospitality and inclusion that you've created within the Neighbor Up groups?
Well, I would say a couple of things. And Gwen, if the first thing I'd say is, well, first thing I do want to say before I get to that question is, there is conflict in this too, right? So this isn't all feel good. I just want to make sure people know. People are dealing with really hard issues, right? And so with this, people have taken on really important issues where there is some conflict, right? It's not all just feel good, happy talk. Birthing Beautiful Communities that's worked on infant mortality. They started with a Neighbor Connections grant, and we're really involved in the network to help build that out, right? That's working on infant mortality now with mothers, doulas throughout Northeast Ohio, right? There's another group that worked to, move university hospitals to hire local, right? Over 400 and some people have been hired from the neighborhoods around University Circle to work at university hospitals with full-time jobs, right? With benefits and room to move up. So some of that takes some hard conversations too. So I just want to say that as well. This stuff isn't just to feel good. It's also, that's part of it, but it's also to move issues forward, right? The work we've done on racial equity, right? There was a big march that one of our members planned in Buckeye earlier this year with the NAACP. So there's a lot. But I would say the big thing that the division between institutions and community is really wide, and there's a real distrust, as we know, of institutions. So I think the institutions, like we're an institution, Neighborhood Connections, and one of the things we have to do is make space for people to determine their own future. So what that includes is the leadership of the organization, sharing power, right? That's like the key thing. There has to be shared power. And how do you do that? Some of that is from working from the side, right? In accompaniment with people, rather than saying, I'm going to determine the future or dictate the future. Creating the space for the people most affected to get together with some of the institutional people and say, how do we figure this out together? And to me, that's at the heart of it, is the practices and the culture. Gwen, do you want to add anything? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
No.
you've said basically what I was going to say is you do have to think outside the box, and I'm talking about not only think outside the box, you have to move outside the box. You just can't, you got to be doers. You can't just, you gotta come to the people in the institution must come down to the grassroots level, to where the people are. You just can't dump money on people. You gotta help them be more realistic. Treat people like people. The first thing I was gonna say is get rid of some of the rules and the regulations, and because everybody don't fit into those boxes, so change some of that thinking. Yeah.
And then some practical things, hire people from the community,
Right.
Every person we've hired to full-time staff positions at Neighborhood Connections, with the exception of one person, is from Cleveland, right? Grew up in Cleveland. Everybody lived in Cleveland. And really looking for people of color, right? People who are the most affected by some of the systemic racism, to hire them to be in positions of authority and to give them some authority to make decision-making authority. The other thing is with the board, right? Having a board that's representative of the community is another key thing. Being willing to be challenged by the people who work with you, right? Like to say, hey, we're not paying attention enough. That's happened to me a few times. We're not paying enough attention to racial equity. We need to pay attention to that, and having the ability to say, okay, listen to that and say, well, where do we go from here, right? I think that's, all of those are really important. And then I'd say the last thing that I think is vitally important is, you know, people in the neighborhood are mined constantly for information. Let's go hear what they have to say. And then the institution goes back and makes decisions based on information. People in the neighborhood are sick of that. They want to be involved in the actual decision-making and implementation. So pay people from the neighborhood, right? They need to be paid. Gwen's put in her, you know, heart and soul into the community, right? This should be a paid position. I'm getting paid. Why isn't she getting paid, right? So I know in some places it's about volunteerism and some of that. Well, I think in neighborhoods where it's distressed and opportunities lacking, people need opportunity, right? And given a chance. And that's what we're trying to do. Say, hey, you can do this. You have what it takes. Come with us. Let's bring your best self. Let's deal with the trauma. Let's deal with the wounds. Let's deal with the struggles, right? But you're more than that, right? You're far more than that. And that includes me, right? That includes all of us, whether we're white from privileged backgrounds or whether we're not, right? That we all have our wounds. We have to deal with those things, and we have to share some power to make those changes. So it's seeing people in a much different way, not as problems to be solved, but people with gifts, people with talents, people with wisdom, people with experience, right? And there's thousands of people out there, thousands in Cleveland neighborhoods right now who are just waiting for that invitation. They're waiting for that invitation.
I have one final thought. This is a quote. I can't remember who it's by. If men could only know each other, they would neither idolize nor hate.
And I think that is a wonderful way to wrap up what has been a fantastic conversation today. And Gwen and Tom, thank you so much for sharing your passion and your work. It is inspiring to hear about the relationships you have built and the impact you have made in the community. And we look forward to hearing much more from Neighbor Up and from Gwen and all of the work that you are doing. So thank you for joining us today and for such a great conversation.